Hello friends. As we've learned from previous videos on this subject, fairies have been around since the beginning of recorded time, perhaps even earlier. They play an important role in many cultures' folklore all around the world. Some believe they are benevolent and still think of the Disney-fied Tinkerbell versions of pixies and sprites as how all fairies are in nature and how they communicate with us humans. Others, however, know better and know the truth, just as we in this community are starting to learn through this series. Fairies, or the FAE, are portrayed as demons, fallen angels, elementals, nature spirits. The list goes on and on for each culture's explanation of the FAE. They are known to have all kinds of supernatural powers and accused of being responsible for all types of magical and even paranormal activities. We've gone through some of the types of the FAE and what we believe their purpose is here in our realm. We've talked about how some species enslave humans and to what end they do so. Today, we're going to walk through the account of fairy sightings and interactions. Is there a specific type of person more likely to see them? Are they more inspired to kidnap and take back to their realm one type of human over another? What type of mischief do they cause? Let's take a look at some FAE encounters through the ages and see if we can make some connections. Welcome to The Missing and the FAE, Part 4. Believe it or not, there is one place in the United States that has had so many FAE encounters that to those of us who are interested in and researching these topics could possibly give this place the name the fairy capital of the United States. What mysterious and unknown woodland or forest am I speaking of here? Well, neither. Would you believe Detroit, Michigan? Now, this is not just a couple of sightings by New Age intellectuals trying to push the fairies are real and can live in urban areas too agenda. For centuries, there have been reports of gnomes and other species of little people in the Detroit area. Some of them date back even before the Europeans settled here. So basically, before it was even named Detroit, possibly before the state of Michigan even existed. Is it something about the land there? Did the settlers intrude on some magical place where the veil between our world and theirs is so much more thin? Let's look at some of these FAE encounters and see if we can figure it out. The origins of our first story lie within the Ottawa tribe. These are the natives who were living on the land before the English and French settlers came in and took it over. This particular encounter tells of the Red Dwarf, as the natives called them. These little people are just as mischievous as their brother and sister species and can be just as mean and evil. However, and it's interesting, as it always is when dealing with the FAE, that this particular type of FAE are the protectors of the land and the caretakers of the earth. Extremely powerful nature spirits who are most likely provoked by colonization of any sort that doesn't recognize the FAE and respect the land itself. When the French settlers came into that area, they brought with them their own legends of the FAE. Theirs were called Luten, which actually have their origins in Nordic folklore. However, the French seemed to believe very much in these devious little tricksters who went about playing pranks on the settlers and anyone they could get a good shot at. They disliked humans and even displayed at times some behaviors which we would consider to be similar to the effects of having a poltergeist or noisy spirit in our home. So, suffice to say, these FAE used their magic and enjoyed doing so. They are very mean-spirited and sometimes even downright evil. So, as the French colonized the land there where Detroit is now and mixed with the natives, these two legends ended up combining. The Europeans came in and with their own legends of the FAE, which were that these creatures were more than merely mysterious forest entities who played mean-spirited pranks, but rather malevolent harbingers of doom, chaos, and destruction. The founder of Detroit, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac, on March 10, 1701, decided to throw a party. During the party, as he was greeting his guests, he noticed some people he didn't invite and who definitely weren't dressed for the occasion. One was a woman who looked more like a fortune teller and had a cat on her shoulder. She immediately took his palm and told him that while he was destined to start a great city, it would be a place of much violence and bloodshed for ages to come. The old hag also gave a warning to dear Antoine. Pay homage to and heed the red dwarves, and do not, for any reason, upset them. She went on to explain that to do so would be his downfall. Now, Antoine, being a modern man for his age, didn't believe in such things as fortune tellers, palm readings, and fey creatures, and laughed at the woman and kicked her out of his party. He had her removed quite violently, in fact, and went on about his days without giving even a second thought to her warning about not upsetting the Fae, who were already inhabiting the area he was trying to colonize and turn into the greatest settlement the New World had seen so far. One night, Antoine decided to take one of his mistresses for a walk around his new city. As the couple were walking, they overheard some of the settlers talking amongst themselves and stopped to eavesdrop. The group were talking about how they had seen Les Petites Nains Rouges, or the Little Red Dwarfs, and that they felt the city was now doomed to fail and falter. Once again, Antoine scoffed and was even amused by the stories, which were growing by the day, of the people settling the colony catching sight of these little people, or Fae folk, as we have come to collectively call and know them. Not long after this event, however, Antoine Cadillac himself had his own encounter with what he described as a deformed dwarf-like creature, covered in blackish red fur and possessing beady eyes. The creature's face was fierce and its eyes piercing and blood red. It had crooked and disgusting teeth when it looked at him and sneered. He took a club that was standing nearby and bashed the creature about the head, but it just laughed and ran off. He allegedly had this particular encounter in his own grand home. After this, so the legend has it, Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac lost everything. He died alone and penniless, a ruined man. The city named after him left with a kind of strange curse, just as the old hag fortune-teller had predicted. Would Detroit be the same today if he had simply heeded her warning and given respect to the Red Dwarfs? Now, while we'll never know, but it is said that they still roam around the city to this very day, and sightings haven't become more scarce since the 1700s, when Antoine had first envisioned the settlement. These self-same creatures, or perhaps one of the same species anyway, who look exactly the same, was seen that same year repeatedly by a farmer in the area. The farmer alleged that the thing would peer in his windows at night, terrify his family. It would also stalk him as he plowed his fields and tended to his animals. Likewise, his family and young children especially weren't immune to the creature's torment. Another farmer, around the same time, said this same beast-looking thing would stomp on the roof of his barn at all hours of the day, and especially at night, just to rile up the horses and cause the tired family great strife. It would steal his chickens as well. On July 23, 1763, 200 British troops had amassed on the outskirts of the city to surprise a group of native rebels who had defied the post-war policies the British had put into place for the settlers and Native Americans in the area alike. This apparently made them the enemy, and the troops were prepared to surprise attack them during the night while they were unguarded and asleep. This was during the insurgent uprising which is known to this day as Pontiac's War. This was, of course, named for the fierce leader of the Ottawa tribe, Chief Pontiac. The war that this led to was extremely violent, with the armies on each side killing and attacking innocent civilians on the streets and in the villages, pillaging homes and slaughtering women, infants, and children who had nothing to do with anything and no rights to do with anything even if they wanted to. It was total chaos and bloodshed, and the Red Dwarfs didn't go without noticing all that blood being spilled on their sacred land. They were seen by hundreds of people during this time, soldiers and Native Americans alike. They were spotted sitting on the banks of a nearby creek where the bloodiest battle took place. This creek, which ran so red with blood, it was still to this day known as Bloody Run, and the little Red Dwarfs were dancing and celebrating. They were literally laughing and shouting with glee, not rooting for one side or the other, mind you, just reveling in the death and carnage of the war before them. Their demeanor was described as elated and joyous. They were even witnessed dancing amongst the corpses of the dead and swimming in the bloody creek. These little evil creatures were celebrating the bloodshed. Flash forward now, during the Great Detroit Fire of 1805, which burned most of the city to the ground, the Red Dwarfs were sighted by hundreds of witnesses at that time too. In the days leading up to the fire, they were seen by many witnesses throughout the city, most of whom didn't even know what they were seeing. By the time the 1800s rolled around, most people had forgotten about the city's founder and the warning of the old hag fortune teller. While the disastrous fire was still blazing and people were dying left and right all around, witnesses reported seeing evil little red men dancing around in the flames and on top of the charred corpses. They were seen in the aftermath of the War of 1812 and all the way up into modern times, including the race riots in the 1960s and the extreme desolation and abandoned buildings that occupy Detroit to this day. Now, let's move out of the Motor City and into some more desolate areas of the world and see what other encounters and species we can uncover and perhaps learn a bit about, in case the need should ever arise that we need to be knowledgeable about the Fae and perhaps what to do should we come upon one or several. We should already know that there are thousands of species and hundreds of realms. When a person is kidnapped by a fairy, their fate depends on so many things. We always talk in these videos about the missing in the woods and the Fae's responsibility for such abductions and even the deaths of the missing in question. But what about the people who have come back, that survived? What are their stories like? What do they remember, if anything, about where they were and maybe even why? What happens when the missing end up deceased and people suspect a Fae to be the culprit? How do you explain that to the police? In 1909, a woman in Ireland named Annie McIntyre was abducted by fairies, allegedly, and had quite a story to tell. She was said to have been born on Halloween in 1839, which makes her more prone, some say, to being able to see and possibly interact with many supernatural realms, including those of the Fae folk. She is said to have had a lifelong obsession with, but an immense respect for the Fae. She claims this is because on the night of her birth, she was abducted by the Fae, and had it not been for her brother happening upon the celebrations, she would have most certainly become one of them. No changeling was left behind, and though no one is sure why she was left alone on the night of her birth to be stolen, here's what she claimed until the day she died. On that night of Halloween, in 1839, fairies crept into her home mere minutes after she was born and stole away with her, wrapped in her bedclothes and a small sheet her mother had made for her. As the fairies were bringing her to the nearest circle or portal to one of their realms, they were celebrating, dancing and singing under the moonlight. They were cheering that they had gotten away without being seen, and the couple, who were the ones who would be raising the child, were being hoisted on the other little people's backs. It was a grand celebration while they moved towards the portal. However, Annie's brother was coming back from a friend's house, walking through the woods, and heard the commotion. The flutes and music being played and celebrations happening in the woods right behind his house. He went to investigate and claims he saw dozens of little people carrying off his infant sister, who he knew had just been born that very day. Allegedly, he took his Bible, which he just happened to be carrying, and tossed it right into the group of fairies. They immediately set the infant down and scattered, most of them simply disappearing into thin air. He scooped his baby sister up into his arms and brought her back to the family home. Annie's mother and family were so overjoyed with her return that they had a huge celebration themselves and doted over her, so much as she was almost lost to them forever. There were many precautions set into place that night in that village which have lived on throughout the centuries to assure that babies would no longer be so easily swept up and taken by fairies in the night. Iron bars being hung above the crib itself being made entirely of iron, pinning the infant's nightclothes to the pillow or mattress of the crib, sprinkling the child with holy water before bed and throughout the day if they should be left alone for even a second. There were so many ways thought of to protect infants and children back then from a Fae abduction. Now, these precautions didn't always work, though, but for the most part, they did, or at least they seemed to. Maybe it would be wise for those of us in modern times who believe in and have respect for such things to take notice of and heed the warnings and advice of preventative measures. Instead, though, we buy cute little kits to build our own fairy gardens and set elf totems on a shelf at Christmas time, which, unbeknownst to most people, only provokes the elemental spirits and invites them into your home to do you even more harm. Aside from the brownie species of the Fae, we have yet to find another who is inherently good and not known for any evil intentions or ill will toward the human race who has plowed down their homes in the forest and disrespected them by portraying them as goofy little scantily clad women flying around sprinkling magic into little kids' eyes just to play with them, or men just to daze and seduce them. Maybe we should give them more credit and be more wise in their ways. Then maybe they'll stop abducting not only our children, but our hunters, our campers, our hikers, our sightseers, from the beautiful and majestic lands and national parks and national forests that the Fae folk guard so tightly and try so hard to keep us from destroying. Well, there you have it, folks. What do you think about these Fae people? I know many people that readily believe in UFOs and Bigfoot will kind of giggle at you if you mention the Fae, but if you look deep enough into the Fae, you'll find that Bigfoot-type elementals and men from the stars in flying vehicles were also told in Fae encounters as well, centuries ago. I look forward to reading your comments, but please keep it friendly and respect each other's opinions. Meanwhile, be good to yourselves and each other. I'll see you just a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.